one devastating moment, Lady Emmeline lost everything: her fiancé to her cousin, her reputation to scandal, her future to ruin. But when a mysterious diplomat offers her an escape from society's cruel judgment, will she discover that her greatest humiliation was actually the doorway to her most authentic life? Lady Emmeline Blackwood sat in her room as her maid fixed her hair. The spring sun was warm and birds sang outside her window. In 3 days she would marry Viscount James Harrington. Her family had worked for this match for years. The Harrington lands touched her family's northern fields, making it a perfect union. Emmeline looked in the mirror. Her brown curls were now neatly under her hat. Her white gloves had tiny pearls sewn on them. They had cost more than a maid earned in a month. Her cream dress was new, made just for today's garden walk with James. "You look lovely," said her mother, who had just come in. The Countess of Blackwood was a tall woman with sharp eyes that missed nothing. "Every girl in London will wish she were you when you marry the Viscount." Emmeline smiled the way she had been taught, not too wide, not showing teeth. "Thank you, mother. I will try to make you proud." "See that you do," her mother said. She touched the pearl at Emmeline's throat, a gift from James. "The Harrington name goes back 500 years. Remember that when you speak today. Nothing too clever, nothing that might make James think you have odd ideas." "Yes, mother." Emmeline had heard this many times. A lady should be pretty and quiet. She should play piano well enough to please, but not so well that she might seem to show off. Her paintings should be nice, but not too bold. Her talk should be light and never about serious things. Emmeline stood and smoothed her dress. She had spent her whole life learning to be the perfect lady. She could name every flower in a proper garden. She knew which fork to use at dinner. She never spoke of books that might make people think she had strong views. "Lady Emmeline," a maid said from the door, "the Viscount has arrived." Emmeline felt her heart beat faster, but not from love. It was more like the feeling before a test. Would she pass? Would she say the right things? Would her mother find fault with her later? "Remember, daughter," the Countess said as they walked down the wide stairs of Blackwood House. "The Harringtons have more money than we do, but our name is older. Hold your head high, but never forget that this match is good for our family." At the bottom of the stairs stood James. He was handsome in the way that rich young men often are, well-fed, well-dressed, with the look of someone who's never heard the word no. His golden hair was cut in the latest style. His blue coat was made by the best tailor in London. "Lady Emmeline," he said, bowing just the right amount, "you look charming today." "Thank you, Lord Harrington," she said, dropping into a perfect curtsy. "You're kind to say so." They walked in the garden, a maid trailing 10 steps behind, close enough to see them, but not to hear their words. This was proper for an engaged couple. "My mother has ordered the flowers for our wedding," James said. "White roses from our hothouses. They will match your dress." "How lovely," Emmeline said, though no one had asked what flowers she might like. "And the guest list is complete. 200 people, all the best families." James looked pleased. "Even the Duke of Wellington may come if he's in London. That would be an honour," Emmeline said. She tried to feel happy. This was what she had been raised for, a good match, a big wedding, a place in high society. So why did she feel like she was slowly being wrapped in silk threads, like a fly caught by a spider? "My cousin Margaret arrives tomorrow," Emmeline said, trying to think of something that made her happy. "She's been away in the country for so long, I've missed her terribly." "Ah yes, the cousin." James didn't sound very interested. "The one who lives with that odd aunt in Somerset." "Margaret is my dearest friend," Emmeline said, a tiny touch of real feeling in her voice. "We grew up together before she moved away. She knows me better than anyone." "Well, she'll be at the wedding, of course," James said. "Though I hear her dress sense is quite country. Your mother mentioned it." Emmeline felt a flash of anger but hid it behind a smile. "Margaret has a good heart. That matters more than her dresses." James gave her a look that made her wish she hadn't spoken up for her cousin. "A good heart is well enough, but in London, appearances matter most. You understand that, don't you, my dear?" "Of course," she said quickly. "I only meant—" "I know what you meant," he cut in. "Now tell me you like the pearl. My mother helped me pick it." Emmeline touched the cold stone at her throat. "It's beautiful. I shall wear it always." Later, alone in her room, Emmeline looked out at the garden where she had walked with James. In the growing dark, she could just make out the shape of a bird flying free above the trees. For a brief moment, she wished she could join it. Then she turned away from the window. Such thoughts were foolish. Her path was set. In 3 days she would be Lady Harrington. It was everything she had been raised to want, everything she should want. So why did the pearl at her throat sometimes feel like it was choking her? The day of the Duchess of Pembroke's garden party was sunny and warm. It was the last big party before Emmeline's wedding, and everyone who mattered in London society would be there. Emmeline wore a light blue dress with tiny white flowers stitched around the hem. Her maid had spent 2 hours doing her hair, pinning it up with pearl clips that matched her necklace. "Remember to smile," her mother said as their carriage rolled up the long driveway to the Duchess's grand house. "Everyone will be watching the future Lady Harrington." Emmeline nodded, her stomach tight with nerves. She looked out the window at the huge house. It had more than 50 windows across the front, and the garden spread out for acres. Stone statues lined the paths, and servants in matching clothes stood ready to help guests from their carriages. When they arrived, Emmeline put on her practiced smile. She nodded to people she knew, spoke when spoken to, and tried to be exactly what everyone expected. The garden was full of ladies with bright dresses and fancy hats, like flowers moving in the breeze. Men in dark coats stood in groups talking about politics and horses. "Emmeline!" a happy voice called from behind her. She turned to see Margaret, her cousin, hurrying toward her. Margaret's dress wasn't as fine as the others, and her hat was a bit old-fashioned, but her smile was real and warm. "Margaret!" Emmeline hugged her cousin, not caring that her mother frowned at such a public show of feeling. "I'm so glad you're here. When did you arrive in London?" "Just yesterday," Margaret said. "I wouldn't miss your wedding for anything." But something in her eyes didn't match her happy words. She looked away quickly. "Is James here? I haven't met him yet." "He should be," Emmeline said, looking around the garden. "He said he would join me for the croquet game." But James wasn't at the croquet game. He wasn't by the refreshment table or talking with the other young men about hunting. "Have you seen Lord Harrington?" Emmeline asked a servant who was carrying drinks. The man wouldn't look at her face. "I believe his lordship is in the rose garden, my lady." Something about the way he said it made Emmeline's heart beat faster. The rose garden was at the far end of the grounds, away from the party. Why would James be there alone? Emmeline walked down the gravel path toward the roses. The sound of the party faded behind her. She could smell the sweet scent of the flowers before she saw them. Hundreds of roses in red, pink, white and yellow, all growing around a small stone building with open sides. As she got closer, she heard voices. One was James. The other was a woman. They were speaking too softly for her to hear the words, but something in their tone made her slow down, step more quietly. She came around the corner of the rose-covered building and stopped. There, half hidden by climbing roses, stood James, and in his arms was Margaret, her cousin, her best friend. They were kissing, not in the polite way of greeting, but deeply, like people who had done this many times before. "I cannot marry her," James was saying against Margaret's hair. "It has always been you, Margaret. Emmeline is merely the proper choice. Her family name, her connections. My parents would never approve of anyone else." "But the wedding is in 3 days," Margaret whispered. It's too late." "Nothing is too late," James said. "We could run away, go to Scotland." Emmeline must have made a sound, because suddenly they both turned. Margaret's face went white. James stepped back, his eyes wide with shock. "Emmeline," he said, "this isn't... You don't understand." But what was there to misunderstand? The man she was to marry in 3 days was in the arms of her cousin, the person she had trusted most in the world. A twig snapped behind her. Emmeline turned to see they were no longer alone. 3 ladies from the party stood watching, their fans stopped in mid-wave. Beyond them, more people were coming down the path, drawn by some sixth sense that scandal was happening. Her mother pushed through the small crowd, her face hard with anger. "Smile," she hissed at Emmeline. "Say nothing, we will handle this privately." For a moment, Emmeline almost did what she had always done, what she had been taught to do: obey, pretend, keep up appearances. But something inside her broke free. Without a word, she reached up and took off the pearl necklace James had given her. Then she pulled the ring from her finger, the ring that had been in the Harrington family for 6 generations, as James had proudly told her. She placed both on a stone bench. The sound of the ring touching stone seemed very loud in the quiet garden. Then she turned and walked away. She didn't run. She didn't cry. She walked with her head high through the crowd of people who stepped back to let her pass, their faces hungry for drama. She could hear her mother calling her name, could hear the rising buzz of talk behind her, could almost feel the news spreading through the party like fire through dry grass. When she reached the front of the house, she found a footman. "Please call my carriage," she said, surprised at how steady her voice was. "Right away, my lady," he said, looking at her with pity in his eyes. "Everyone must know by now." "But not to Blackwood House," she added as he turned to go. "Take me to Lady Helena Winters in Bloomsbury." The footman's eyes widened slightly. Everyone knew about Lady Helena too, how she lived alone after her husband died instead of going to live with family, how she had strange friends who were not part of proper society. As the carriage pulled away from the Duchess's grand house, Emmeline looked back once. She could see James running up from the garden, Margaret nowhere in sight. She could see her mother's angry face as she shouted something Emmeline couldn't hear. Then they were past the gates and on the road to London, leaving behind everything she had ever known. Her hands were shaking now, and her breath came fast, but still no tears came. What would happen to her now? A lady with no husband, no future, no place in the society she had been raised for. She didn't know. For the first time in her life, tomorrow was not planned out for her. And deep inside, under the hurt and fear, she felt something strange stirring, something that might, someday, feel like freedom. Lady Helena Winters lived in a tall, narrow house on a quiet street in Bloomsbury. It wasn't as big as Blackwood House, but it had a certain charm with its red door and windows full of plants. When Emmeline's carriage stopped in front, she sat still for a long moment. The sky was turning pink with sunset, and lamps were being lit along the street. She had never gone anywhere alone before. She had never made a decision like this. The carriage door opened, and the driver held out his hand. "We've arrived, my lady." Emmeline took a deep breath and stepped down. Her legs felt wobbly, like they might not hold her up. She walked to the red door and lifted the brass knocker shaped like a lion's head. The door was opened by a woman in a plain dark dress. She wasn't wearing the cap that most housekeepers wore, and her grey hair was pulled back in a simple knot. "Yes?" she asked, looking Emmeline up and down. "I'm Lady Emmeline Blackwood," she said, her voice small. "I'm here to see Lady Helena Winters. She's my godmother." The woman's face softened. "Come in then. I'm Mrs. Parker. I keep house for Lady Helena." Emmeline stepped into a hallway lined with bookshelves instead of the paintings of ancestors that filled her family's home. The air smelled of lemon polish and something else, old books and dried flowers. "Wait here," Mrs. Parker said, showing her to a small sitting room. "I'll tell Lady Helena you've come." Left alone, Emmeline looked around the room. It wasn't what she expected. Books were piled on tables and a half-finished piece of needlework lay on a chair. A large desk by the window was covered with papers. It looked like someone actually lived here, not just had parties and visitors. The door opened, and Lady Helena came in. She was tall and thin, with streaks of grey in her dark hair. She wore a simple dress of deep purple, without the frills and bows that most ladies wore. Her eyes were sharp and kind at the same time. "Emmeline," she said, coming forward with her hands out. "What a surprise. I haven't seen you since you were 12 years old." Emmeline tried to speak, but suddenly her throat closed up. All the feelings she had pushed down at the garden party came rushing up. Her eyes filled with tears, and her shoulders began to shake. Lady Helena didn't say anything. She just put her arms around Emmeline and held her while she cried. It was the kind of hug Emmeline's mother never gave, warm and tight and real. When the tears finally stopped, Lady Helena led her to a comfortable chair and rang a small bell. Mrs. Parker appeared at the door. "Tea, please, Mrs. Parker, and perhaps some of your good bread and honey. Lady Emmeline has had a difficult day." While they waited for the tea, Emmeline told her godmother everything. The garden party, James and Margaret, the way she had walked away. Lady Helena listened without interrupting. When the story was finished, she nodded slowly. "You may stay here as long as you wish," she said. "Your father was my dear friend, and I promised him I would look after you if ever you needed me." "My mother will be so angry," Emmeline whispered. "No doubt," Lady Helena agreed. "But you are 21, are you not? Old enough to make your own choices." "I've never made choices before," Emmeline admitted. "Everything was always decided for me." Lady Helena smiled a little sadly. "Then this will be a new experience. But first, you need rest. I'll show you to your room. The room was at the back of the house overlooking a small garden. It had a bed with a blue quilt, a desk under the window and more bookshelves. A fire burned in the small fireplace, making the room feel cozy. "You can hide here for a while," Lady Helena said, turning down the bed. "No one will bother you. You may weep or sleep or just be still. There are no rules in this house except kindness." For 3 days, Emmeline barely left her room. Sometimes she cried until her throat hurt. Sometimes she just sat by the window, watching the garden where spring flowers were starting to bloom. Sometimes she slept, deep, dreamless sleep that came from being completely worn out. Mrs. Parker brought her meals on trays, simple food that tasted better than the fancy dishes at home. Lady Helena came each evening to sit with her, not talking much, just being there. No one asked her what she was going to do or told her how to feel. On the 4th day, the day she was supposed to have married James, Emmeline got up early. She washed her face in the basin of warm water Mrs. Parker had brought, combed her hair, and put on the plain dress that had been found for her since she'd come with no luggage. She went downstairs and found Lady Helena at breakfast in a sunny room at the back of the house. The older woman looked up and smiled. "Good morning. You look better." "I feel better," Emmeline said, sitting down. She buttered a piece of toast and took a bite. "I think I'm done crying." "For now, perhaps," Lady Helen said. "Tears have a way of coming back when we least expect them." They ate in comfortable silence for a while. Then Emmeline said what had been on her mind when she woke up. "I find I'm not really sad about losing James. I didn't love him. I see that now. I'm sad about losing the life I thought I would have. Being a wife, having a place in society, knowing exactly what each day would bring." She looked down at her plate. "I'm not sure who I am without all that." Lady Helena put down her teacup. "Most people never ask themselves who they truly are. They just accept the role they're given. You have a rare chance to find out." "I don't know how," Emmeline admitted. "There's no map for this journey," Lady Helena said, "but I can offer you shelter while you find your way." After breakfast, Lady Helena showed Emmeline the rest of the house. There was a library with more books than Emmeline had ever seen outside a bookshop. There was a music room with a pianoforte that needed tuning. There was even a small room at the top of the house where Lady Helena painted, not pretty watercolours of flowers, but bold oils of city scenes and people. "You may go wherever you like," Lady Helena said. "Read whatever interests you. The servants know you're to be treated as family." That afternoon, a letter came from Emmeline's mother. The Countess demanded she return home at once. The wedding would be postponed, not cancelled. The scandal could still be managed if Emmeline behaved properly. Emmeline read the letter twice, then put it in the fire in the library. "I'm not going back," she told Lady Helena. "Not yet, anyway. Not until I know who I am when no one is telling me what to be." That night, for the first time, she didn't cry herself to sleep. Instead, she lay awake making plans. She would read books her mother had never allowed. She would learn to paint like Lady Helena with bold colours. She would find out what she really thought and felt about things. As she drifted off to sleep, Emmeline realised that for the first time in her life, she was curious about tomorrow instead of afraid of it. That felt like a beginning. Days passed, and Emmeline found a new rhythm to her life in Lady Helena's house. She woke when she wanted, not when a maid came to open her curtains. She wore simple dresses that didn't need a lady's maid to help with buttons and laces. She ate what she liked at meals, not what was proper. At first, she felt lost without the strict rules that had guided her every move since childhood. But slowly, she began to enjoy making small choices for herself. She chose to have tea in the garden one sunny morning. She chose to stay up late reading by candlelight. She chose to walk in the small park nearby without a chaperone, just Mrs. Parker to keep her company. Lady Helena's library became Emmeline's favourite place. The walls were lined with books from floor to ceiling, and a rolling ladder helped reach the higher shelves. The room smelled of leather bindings and the lemon oil used to polish the darkwood shelves. Sunlight came through tall windows, making pools of warmth on the rug where Emmeline liked to sit. Here she found books her mother would never have allowed in Blackwood House. Books by women who had ideas about how ladies should be treated. Books about far-off places she had never seen. Books that made her think about the world in new ways. One rainy afternoon, Lady Helena found her curled in a big chair, reading a book about a woman who travelled alone in Africa. "Do you like Mary Kingsley's writings?" Lady Helena asked, sitting in the chair across from her. "She's so brave," Emmeline said, looking up from the page. "I can't imagine going to such wild places alone." "She found freedom in those journeys," Lady Helena said, "just as you might find freedom in your own way." "I'm not brave like her," Emmeline said softly. "Aren't you?" Lady Helena raised an eyebrow. "You left everything you knew to come here. That took courage." Emmeline had never thought of herself as brave before. It was a new idea, like so many she was discovering in this house. As weeks passed, Emmeline's mother sent more letters. Each one was shorter and angrier than the last. The scandal was growing, people were talking, the family name was being ruined. It was all Emmeline's fault, her mother wrote. If she would just come home and behave properly, perhaps a different match could be arranged. Emmeline put each letter in a drawer without answering. She wasn't ready to face that world again. One evening, Lady Helena said, "I'm having some friends for dinner tomorrow. You're welcome to join us. Or you can eat in your room if you prefer." "What kind of friends?" Emmeline asked. She had noticed that Lady Helena's house often had visitors, but she had stayed hidden away from them. "Interesting ones," Lady Helena said with a small smile. "Not the sort you would have met at your mother's dinner table." Curiosity won over shyness, and the next evening, Emmeline came downstairs wearing her best dress. It was plain compared to what she used to wear, but it was clean and well made. In the drawing room, she found Lady Helena with 5 guests, 3 women and 2 men. They weren't dressed in the latest fashions, and they didn't stand stiffly making small talk. They sat comfortably, laughing and speaking with their hands. Lady Helena introduced them. "This is Miss Collins, who teaches at a school for girls. Mrs. Edwards, who writes for a ladies' magazine. Dr. Lewis, who has just returned from India where he studied plants. Mr. Turner, who paints scenes of London life that the Royal Academy finds too honest to display. And Mrs. Blackwell, our first woman doctor." "A woman doctor?" Emmeline couldn't help asking. "I didn't know women could be doctors." "Many people don't know it," Mrs. Blackwell said with a kind smile. "That's why I do it, to show it can be done." At dinner, they talked about things Emmeline had never heard discussed at a dinner table before. They talked about whether women should be allowed to vote. They talked about poor children who couldn't go to school. They talked about books and ideas and places they had travelled. No one asked Emmeline about her family or her prospects for marriage. Instead, they asked what she thought about the things they discussed. At first, she was too shy to answer. She'd never been asked her opinion before, only if she agreed with what others thought. But as the evening went on, she found herself speaking up. "I think all children should learn to read," she said when they talked about schools. "Boys and girls both." Dr. Lewis nodded. "Exactly so. Education is the key to a better world." After dinner, Miss Collins showed Emmeline a book she'd written about teaching girls math and science. "Lady Helena says you're interested in learning new things," she said. "You might enjoy this." "Thank you," Emmeline said, holding the book carefully. "I was never good at math, but maybe that's because no one thought I needed to be." "It's never too late to learn," Miss Collins said. "I'd be happy to teach you if you'd like." Over the next few months, Emmeline's world grew larger in Lady Helena's house. Miss Collins came twice a week to teach her math. Dr. Lewis showed her how to press and preserve plants for study. Mrs. Edwards helped her write down her thoughts in a journal, and Lady Helena taught her to paint with oils, not just the pretty watercolours that proper young ladies did. They set up easels in the garden and painted what they saw, not just flowers, but the old gardener with his weathered face, the neighbour's cat sleeping in the sun, the back of the house with its red bricks and green ivy. "Your strokes are too careful," Lady Helena said one day, watching Emmeline paint a rose bush. "You're still trying to make everything perfect. Let your hand be free. Let the paint show how you feel about the roses, not just what they look like." Emmeline tried again, using bolder strokes, mixing colours in new ways. The painting didn't look like the pretty pictures she used to make, but it had life in it. "That's better," Lady Helena said. "You're beginning to see with your own eyes, not the eyes society gave you." One morning, 6 months after she'd come to Lady Helena's house, Emmeline sat in the library reading a newspaper. Her hair was pulled back in a simple style she could do herself. Her dress was comfortable, not fashionable. On her lap was a book about stars and planets that Dr. Lewis had lent her. Lady Helena came in and sat across from her. "You look well," she said. "I think you found your feet at last." Emmeline smiled. "I feel like a different person than the girl who came here that night." "Not different," Lady Helena said. Just more yourself, the self that was always there, under all those rules and expectations. There's still so much I want to learn, Emmeline said. About the world, about myself. Learning is the work of a lifetime, Lady Helena said, but perhaps it's time to take the next step. My friends are having a small gathering next week, a musical evening. Would you like to go? It would be your first time back in society, even if it's a very different society than the one you left. Emmeline felt a flutter of fear. She'd been safe in this house, hidden away from the world, but she couldn't hide forever. Yes, she said, surprising herself with how firm her voice sounded. I think I'm ready. Lady Helena nodded, pleased. Good. It's time for you to test your new wings. That night, Emmeline wrote in her journal about all she had learned in Lady Helena's house. How to think for herself, how to question rules that didn't make sense, how to see beauty in unexpected places, how to be brave in small ways that might lead to bigger bravery later. I came here to hide, she wrote, but instead I found myself, and now I think I'm ready to see what's next. The night of the musical evening, rain fell in a soft, steady drizzle. Emmeline stood at her window watching water run down the glass in crooked streams. She wore a simple dress of dove grey. Lady Helena had helped her fix her hair in a style that didn't need a maid's help but still looked nice. A small pearl pin, not from James, but one that had been her father's gift years ago, was her only jewellery. Are you ready? Lady Helena asked, coming to the door of Emmeline's room. She wore a deep blue dress and carried 2 umbrellas. I think so, Emmeline said, but her stomach felt tight with nerves. What if someone from my old life is there? What if they talk about me? Mrs. Edwards and her husband don't move in those circles, Lady Helena said, but if it happens, you'll hold your head high and remember who you are now. The carriage ride was short. The Edwards' home was only 10 streets away, in a part of London where artists and writers lived. Their house was smaller than Lady Helena's, but warm light glowed from all the windows and music drifted out when they opened the door. Inside, about 20 people stood in small groups talking and laughing. A fire crackled in the fireplace. Someone played the pianoforte softly in a corner. The air smelled of cinnamon and hot cider. Mrs. Edwards came to greet them, her kind face breaking into a smile. Lady Helena and Lady Emmeline, I'm so glad you could come. She took their wet wraps and handed them to a maid. Let me introduce you to some friends you haven't met yet. Emmeline followed as Mrs. Edwards led them through the room. She met a poet who wrote about city life, a man who made maps of far-off places, and a woman who had written a book about birds. None of them seemed to know or care about the scandal of her broken engagement. They talked to her about books and ideas, not dresses and marriages. The music began, and everyone found seats. A young man played the violin while a woman sang songs in Italian. Emmeline let the music wash over her, feeling more at peace than she had in months. When the song ended, a man sitting nearby turned to her. Beautiful, isn't it? Music speaks to the soul in a way words never can. He was older than her, perhaps 30, with dark hair and eyes that crinkled at the corners when he smiled. His clothes were fine but not flashy, and he spoke with a slight accent she couldn't place. Yes, she agreed. It was lovely. I'm Nicholas Thornfield, he said, recently returned from Vienna, where the music is even finer than this, though our performers tonight would not want to hear me say so. Vienna? Emmeline said, her interest caught. That's very far away. About 1,000 miles, he said, but worth the journey. And you are? Emmeline Blackwood, she said, leaving off her title. In this house it didn't seem to matter. A look of recognition crossed his face, but he didn't mention the scandal she was sure he must have heard of. Instead he said, Lady Helena's young friend, I've heard you're interested in botanical drawings. Emmeline blinked in surprise. How did you know that? I saw your sketches in Lady Helena's study when I called on her last week. You have a good eye for detail. The way you captured the veins in the leaves of that oak branch was quite remarkable. Emmeline felt her cheeks grow warm. No one had ever praised her drawings as more than a proper accomplishment before. Thank you. I've been trying to improve. Dr. Lewis has been teaching me about plants. Edward Lewis, he's an old friend. We travelled in India together some years ago, Lord Nicholas smiled. He has an excellent collection of botanical specimens. Perhaps you would like to see them sometime? Before Emmeline could answer, Mrs. Edwards called for attention. Lord Nicholas has kindly agreed to tell us about his recent travels in Vienna. As you know, he serves our country in diplomatic work there. Lord Nicholas stood, and moved to the front of the room. For the next half hour he spoke about Vienna, its grand buildings, its music, its people. He didn't talk like the men Emmeline had known before, who boasted about what they had done or whom they had met. Instead, he described ordinary people he had known, a baker who made the best bread in the city, an old woman who fed birds in the park each morning, a child who played violin on street corners. When he finished, people asked questions. Someone asked about the politics of the region, and Lord Nicholas answered thoughtfully, explaining complex ideas in simple words that everyone could understand. Emmeline found herself listening closely, drawn in by his clear way of speaking and the respect he showed for the people and places he described. After the talk, Mrs. Edwards served refreshments, small cakes and hot drinks. Lord Nicholas made his way back to where Emmeline stood with Lady Helena. "Did you enjoy the talk?" he asked. "Very much," Emmeline said truthfully. "I've never been farther from London than our country house in Hampshire. It's hard to imagine such distant places." "The world is vast and full of wonders," Lord Nicholas said. "I hope you'll see some of it yourself one day." "I doubt that," Emmeline said. "Ladies like me don't travel alone, and I—" She stopped, not wanting to mention her broken engagement. "And you find yourself at a crossroads," he finished for her, his voice kind. "Lady Helena mentioned something of your situation. I hope you don't mind." Emmeline looked at Lady Helena, who had the grace to look a bit sheepish. "I may have told Nicholas that you're forging a new path," she admitted. "He's one of the few men I know who wouldn't be shocked by a young woman thinking for herself," Lord Nicholas laughed. "My mother was quite similar to Lady Helena, always doing what she thought right instead of what society expected. She raised me to value women's minds as much as their manners." He turned back to Emmeline. "In any case, I meant what I said about Dr. Lewis's collection. If you're interested in botanical specimens, I've brought back some from the continent that might interest you, flowers that don't grow in England's climate." "I would like that," Emmeline said. "Excellent," Lord Nicholas said. "Perhaps you and Lady Helena could visit my home next week. I have a small conservatory where I keep the more delicate plants." For the rest of the evening, Emmeline found herself talking easily with Lord Nicholas and others at the gathering. They discussed books she had read, ideas she had been thinking about. No one seemed to find it strange that she had opinions or that she expressed them. When it was time to leave, Lord Nicholas helped her with her wrap. "It was a pleasure to meet you, Lady Emmeline. I look forward to showing you my plant collection." In the carriage going home, Lady Helena said, "You did well tonight. How do you feel?" Emmeline thought about it. "Different. In my old life, I went to parties to be seen, not to think or learn. Tonight I talked about real things with interesting people." "And what did you think of Lord Nicholas?" Lady Helena asked with a small smile. "He's not like other men I've known," Emmeline said slowly. "He listens when I speak, and he seems to see me, the real me, not just what I look like or who my family is." "He's a good man," Lady Helena said. "One of the few I know who values women for their minds rather than their beauty or dowries." That night, as Emmeline got ready for bed, she looked at herself in the mirror. The face that looked back was the same one she'd seen all her life, but the eyes were different. They looked clearer, more alive. "I'm changing," she whispered to her reflection. "I'm becoming someone new." She thought about the evening, about the interesting people she had met, about Lord Nicholas with his kind eyes and thoughtful words. For the first time in months, she felt a flutter of hope about the future. Not the future that had been planned for her as Lady Harrington, but a new future she was just beginning to imagine for herself. As she blew out the candle, Emmeline smiled in the darkness. Tomorrow she would start a new drawing of the oak tree in the garden, paying special attention to the veins in the leaves. Lord Nicholas's home was not what Emmeline expected. It wasn't a grand house like her family's, but a comfortable townhouse near the British Museum. Books filled every shelf, maps hung on the walls, and curious objects from far-off places sat on tables and mantels. A dried starfish as big as a dinner plate, a wooden mask with shells for eyes, a small statue of a dancing woman made of smooth green stone. "My father collected interesting things," Lord Nicholas explained as he showed them around, "and I've added my own finds from my travels." The conservatory was at the back of the house, a glass room filled with plants. The air inside was warm and damp, smelling of earth and green things. Sunlight streamed through the glass roof, making patterns on the stone floor. "These are my treasures," Lord Nicholas said, leading Emmeline to a table covered with small pots. Plants from the mountains of Austria, flowers from the fields of France, herbs from Italian gardens. Emmeline bent to look at a tiny plant with purple flowers no bigger than her little fingernail. "It's beautiful," she said. "What is it called?" "Gentiana verna," Lord Nicholas said. "Alpine gentian. It grows high in the mountains where the air is thin and pure. Most people never see it because it's so hard to reach." "Yet you brought it all this way," Emmeline said. "I believe beautiful things should be shared," he replied, watching her face, "even if they're hidden away in remote places." For the next hour, Lord Nicholas showed them plant after plant, telling stories about where he had found each one. He spoke of mountain paths and hidden valleys, of local people who had taught him about their plants and how to care for them. "Would you like to draw some of these?" he asked Emmeline, noticing how carefully she studied each leaf and flower. "I have paper and pencils in my study." Soon Emmeline was seated at a small desk by the window, sketching a branch of a plant called rosemary. Lord Nicholas sat nearby, answering her questions about the plant's home in the sunny hills of Spain. "The locals use it in cooking," he told her, "and they say it helps memory. Students wear sprigs of it in their hair when they take tests." "Does it really work?" Emmeline asked, looking up from her drawing. Lord Nicholas smiled. "I don't know. But isn't it interesting that people so far away have their own beliefs and customs? Things that seem strange to us make perfect sense to them." "I never thought about how different life might be in other places," Emmeline admitted. "In my world, everyone follows the same rules." "And what do you think of those rules now?" Lord Nicholas asked gently. Emmeline's pencil paused on the paper. I think some of them don't make sense. Why shouldn't girls learn about stars and plants? Why must a woman marry to have value? Why are some people treated as better than others just because of the family they were born into?" "Good questions," Lord Nicholas said. "The kind that most people never ask." When it was time to leave, Lord Nicholas walked them to their carriage. "I'm having a small dinner party next week," he said. "Just a few friends who share an interest in the natural world. Would you both like to come?" Lady Helena accepted for them both, and as the carriage pulled away, Emmeline found herself already looking forward to seeing Lord Nicholas again. Over the next weeks, Emmeline saw Lord Nicholas often. They went to the British Museum, where he showed her Egyptian plants preserved for 3,000 years. They visited the Royal Botanic Gardens, where plants from all over the world grew in huge glass houses. They attended lectures at the Royal Society, where scientists talked about new discoveries. Each time they met, Emmeline wore one of her simple dresses, not the fancy gowns of her old life. She did her hair herself in a plain style. She carried a notebook to write down interesting facts and make quick sketches of things she saw, and each time, Lord Nicholas treated her as if she were the most interesting person he had ever met. He listened to her thoughts, asked for her opinions, and seemed to enjoy showing her new things. One bright afternoon in late summer, they walked in St. Marie, James's Park. The lake sparkled in the sun, and ducks paddled between the small islands. Children flew kites on the green lawns, their laughing faces turned up to the sky. "I have something for you," Lord Nicholas said, reaching into his coat pocket. He pulled out a small book bound in green leather. "I found it in a bookshop yesterday." Emmeline took the book and read the title, A Lady's Guide to the Night Sky. "You mentioned wanting to learn about the stars," Lord Nicholas said. "This book was written by a woman astronomer. I thought you might like it." "Thank you," Emmeline said, running her fingers over the smooth cover. No one had ever given her a book before, only jewellery or flowers. "I'll start reading it tonight." They walked in silence for a while, watching the people around them. Families having picnics on blankets spread on the grass, old men playing chess at stone tables, young couples walking arm in arm. "May I ask you something?" Lord Nicholas said as they paused to watch a boy sailing a toy boat on the lake. "Of course," Emmeline said. "Are you happy now, with your new life?" Emmeline thought about it carefully. "I think I am. Not always. Sometimes I miss my family, even though they try to make me into someone I'm not. Sometimes I worry about the future. But mostly, yes, I'm happier than I was before." "Why?" Lord Nicholas asked, his eyes intent on her face. "Because I'm learning who I really am," Emmeline said slowly. "All my life, I was told what to think, how to speak, even how to feel. Now I'm discovering what I truly believe and want." "And what do you want?" Lord Nicholas asked, his voice soft. Emmeline looked out over the park at the people living their different lives. "I want to keep learning. I want to see more of the world. I want to use my mind, not just be pretty and proper." She paused, then added more quietly, "I want to be valued for who I am inside, not just for my family name or how I look." Lord Nicholas reached out and took her hand. His palm was warm against hers. "I value who you are, Emmeline. From the first moment we met, I saw something in you that had nothing to do with your title or your beauty. I saw your curious mind, your kind heart, your courage to start a new life." Emmeline felt her heart beating faster. In her old life, men had flattered her about her face, her grace, her family connections. No one had ever seen past those things to the person inside. "There's a concert at the Royal Academy next week," Lord Nicholas said, still holding her hand. "Mozart's music, performed by a string quartet from Vienna. Would you like to go with me? Just the two of us?" "Yes," Emmeline said, surprising herself with how sure she felt. "I would like that very much." As they walked back toward Lady Helena's house, Emmeline thought about how different her life had become. 6 months ago, she had been engaged to a man who saw her as a suitable match, nothing more. Now she was walking beside a man who valued her thoughts, who gave her books instead of jewels, who wanted to show her the world instead of keeping her in a grand house like a pretty bird in a cage. That night, Emmeline sat by her window reading the book about stars. The night sky spread above London, a black velvet cloth sprinkled with silver. She found the North Star just as the book described, and marvelled that it had been there all her life, but she had never really looked at it before. "There's so much I never saw," she whispered to the night. "So much I never knew to look for." She thought of Lord Nicholas and the way his eyes crinkled when he smiled, the gentle way he had held her hand, the respect in his voice when he spoke to her. A warm feeling grew in her chest, spreading outward like ripples in a pond. Was this what it felt like to fall in love? Not the proper polite feeling she had tried to have for James, but something real and true, growing from who she really was, not who she pretended to be. Emmeline closed the book and held it against her heart. Tomorrow she would learn more about the stars, and next week she would go to the concert with Lord Nicholas. One step at a time, she was building a new life, a life that felt like her own. Spring came again to London, bringing soft green buds to the trees in the parks and bright daffodils pushing up through the dark earth. A full year had passed since Emmeline had fled from the Duchess of Pembroke's garden party. A year of change, of growth, of finding herself. She stood at the window of Lady Helena's drawing room, watching rain tap against the glass. Behind her, Lady Helena and Lord Nicholas sat talking quietly by the fire. These peaceful evenings together had become a regular part of her life. Sometimes they read aloud from books, sometimes they discussed ideas, sometimes they just enjoyed being together. "There's an invitation for you," Lady Helena said, holding out a cream-coloured card. "From the Duchess of Pembroke." Emmeline turned from the window, surprised. "For me?" "For both of us," Lady Helena said. "Her annual spring garden party, the same one you attended last year." Emmeline took the card, her fingers tracing the fancy gold letters. A year ago, such an invitation would have been the most important thing in her life. Now it brought back memories she'd tried to forget. James and Margaret in the rose garden, her mother's angry face, her own shame as she walked away. "You don't have to go," Lord Nicholas said gently. "No one would blame you for staying away." "But perhaps you want to go," Lady Helena added. "To show them all how well you've done without their approval." Emmeline looked down at the invitation. Did she want to go? To face the whispers, the stares, the judgment of the society that had once been her whole world? The thought made her stomach tight with fear. But there was something else too, a need to close that chapter of her life properly. "I'll go," she said finally, "but not to show off or prove anything, just to see that world again with new eyes." The day of the garden party dawned bright and clear, as if the rain had washed London clean for the occasion. Emmeline dressed with care in a gown of deep sapphire blue, not the pale girlish colours she had once worn. Her hair was arranged simply but elegantly. Around her neck hung a small silver pendant Lord Nicholas had given her, shaped like a star. "You look beautiful," Lady Helena said as they stepped into the carriage, "but more importantly, you look strong." The Duchess's grand house looked just as it had a year ago. The same stone steps leading to the same massive doors, the same well-kept gardens spreading out behind the house. But Emmeline was not the same. As they walked through the crowd of guests, she felt the stares, heard the whispers behind gloved hands. It's the Blackwood girl. Can you imagine the nerve, after what happened last year? Emmeline held her head high. These whispers couldn't hurt her now. She had faced worse and survived. Lady Helena was quickly drawn into conversation with an old acquaintance, leaving Emmeline momentarily alone. She walked slowly toward the refreshment table, nodding politely to those who met her eyes. Lady Emmeline. The voice behind her made her freeze. She knew that voice. Taking a deep breath, she turned. James stood there looking much as he had a year ago. His golden hair was neatly combed. His clothes perfectly tailored, but his eyes showed surprise. He had not expected her to be here. "Lord Harrington," she said calmly. I didn't think you would come," he said. "Clearly," Emmeline replied. "Yet here I am." "You look well," James said, his eyes taking in her blue dress, her confident posture. "I've heard you're living with Lady Helena now, in Bloomsbury." He said the word as if it were a foreign country. "Yes," Emmeline said. "I've found it suits me better than Mayfair." An awkward silence fell between them. Once, Emmeline would have rushed to fill it with polite chatter. Now she waited, watching James shift uncomfortably. "I suppose you know that Margaret and I were married last month," he finally said. "I had heard," Emmeline said. "I wish you both happiness." James blinked, clearly surprised by her sincerity. "Thank you," he said. Then, lowering his voice, "I should have told you the truth from the beginning, about my feelings for Margaret. It was wrong to let things go so far when my heart was elsewhere." "Yes, it was," Emmeline agreed. "But I'm grateful now. Had we married, I might never have discovered myself beneath the person I pretended to be." James looked at her curiously. "You speak so differently now. The Emmeline I knew would never have said such things." "The Emmeline you knew was a mask I wore," she said. "A perfect, proper young lady who had no thoughts of her own." "And now?" he asked. "Now I'm myself," she said simply. "For the first time in my life." James frowned slightly. "Be careful, Emmeline. There are rumours about you. About the strange people you meet in that house. About you walking alone with that diplomat who consorts with artists and foreigners." "Lord Nicholas," Emmeline said, unable to keep a smile from her face at the mention of his name. "Yes, him," James said. "People talk, Emmeline. They say he's filled your head with unusual ideas, that you've become peculiar." A year ago, those words would have terrified her. To be thought peculiar, to be the subject of gossip. It would have been the worst fate she could imagine. Now she almost laughed. "How frightening that would have seemed to me once," she said. "Now, I find I prefer being peculiar to being merely proper." James stared at her, clearly at a loss for words. Over his shoulder, Emmeline saw Lord Nicholas entering the garden. He scanned the crowd, looking for her. When their eyes met, he smiled. That warm, genuine smile that always made her heart beat faster. "If you'll excuse me," she said to James, "there's someone I need to speak with." She walked away without waiting for his response, moving through the crowd toward Nicholas. As she reached him, he took her hand. "Are you all right?" he asked softly. "I saw you talking with him." "I'm fine," Emmeline said, surprised to find it was true. "Better than fine. I feel free." They walked together through the garden, past groups of chattering guests who fell silent as they passed. Emmeline barely noticed. She was too busy telling Nicholas about her conversation with James, about the lightness she felt now. They stopped by a small pond where water lilies floated on the surface. In the quiet spot away from the main crowd, Nicholas turned to face her. "I have something to ask you," he said, his voice serious. "Something I've wanted to ask for some time." Emmeline's heart jumped. "Yes?" "I've been offered a new diplomatic post," he said. "In Vienna. I leave in a month." "Oh," Emmeline said. Her happiness suddenly dimmed. "How long will you be gone?" "At least 2 years," Nicholas said. "Perhaps longer." He took both her hands in his. "I want you to come with me, Emmeline." She stared at him, not sure she had heard correctly. "To Vienna? But how? I'm not your family, not your—" "As my wife," Nicholas said. "If you'll have me." The world seemed to go still around them. Emmeline looked into Nicholas's kind eyes, at the face that had become so dear to her. "I know it's not what you were raised to expect," he said quickly. "I can't offer you a grand estate or a title. My work requires travel to places where society's rules matter little. But I can promise you respect, partnership, and the freedom to become whoever you choose to be. Emmeline thought of the life she'd once dreamed of, being Lady Harrington, mistress of a great house, moving through the seasons of London society year after year. She thought of the new dream she had now, of seeing distant places, of learning and growing, of being valued for her mind and heart. "I don't need a grand estate," she said softly. "I don't need a title or society's approval." She squeezed his hands. "I just need you, and the chance to keep becoming myself." "Is that a yes?" Nicholas asked, his eyes hopeful. "Yes," Emmeline said, the word coming easily. "I choose you. I choose us." Nicholas's face broke into a wide smile. He leaned forward and kissed her, not the proper peck on the cheek that might be allowed between an engaged couple in public, but a real kiss that spoke of true feeling. When they pulled apart, Emmeline realised that several people nearby were staring, scandalised by such a display. For a moment, old habits made her want to pull away, to apologise, to return to propriety. But then she looked at Nicholas, at the man who saw her, really saw her, and she found she didn't care what anyone else thought. "When shall we tell Lady Helena?" she asked, still holding his hands. "We can tell her tonight," Nicholas said. "I think she'll be pleased. She's been hoping for this, I believe." As they walked back toward the main party, Emmeline caught sight of her mother across the garden. The Countess stood rigid, her face pale with shock and anger as she watched her daughter with Lord Nicholas. For a moment their eyes met, and Emmeline felt a pang of sadness for the relationship they would likely never have. But then Nicholas squeezed her hand gently, and she looked up at him instead. The future stretched before them, unknown but full of promise. She had made her choice, and for the first time in her life, it was truly her own. They married in Lady Helena's garden on a perfect June day. White roses climbed the old brick walls, their sweet smell filling the air. Birds sang in the apple tree, which was covered with late blossoms that drifted down like snow when the wind blew. It was nothing like the wedding Emmeline had once planned in St. George's Church, where 200 of London's finest would have watched her marry James. Instead, only 12 people stood in the small garden. Lady Helena, Dr. Lewis, and his wife, Mrs. Edwards, and her husband, Miss Collins, the kind vicar from the church down the street, and a few of Nicholas's closest friends. Emmeline wore a simple dress of ivory silk with tiny pearl buttons down the back. No 20-foot train, no veil so long it needed 6 girls to carry it. Her hair was loose around her shoulders, held back by a crown of small white flowers that Mrs. Parker had picked from the garden that morning. Nicholas waited for her by the rose arbour, his face breaking into a smile when he saw her walking toward him on Lady Helena's arm. He wore a dark blue coat and looked more handsome than any man had a right to. "Dearly beloved," the vicar began as they stood hand in hand under the roses. But this ceremony was different from the one that had been planned for St. George's. There were no lengthy readings from ancient texts, no stern warnings about a wife's duty to obey. Instead, Nicholas and Emmeline had written their own promises to each other. They spoke them now, their voices clear in the quiet garden. "Emmeline," Nicholas said, looking into her eyes, "I promise to walk beside you, not ahead or behind, to value your mind as much as your heart, to help you grow into whoever you choose to be, to show you as much of the world as we can see together, to love you not for who you were or might become, but for who you are in each moment." Emmeline swallowed past the lump in her throat. "Nicholas," she replied, "I promise to bring my true self to our life together, to speak my thoughts honestly and hear yours with an open heart, to face new places and ideas with courage, knowing you are by my side, to remember that love isn't about perfect manners or proper behaviour, but about seeing and caring for each other's deepest selves." "The rings, please," the vicar said, and Dr. Lewis stepped forward with 2 simple gold bands. No family diamonds, no crests engraved in the metal, just circles of gold, smooth and warm like the late afternoon sun. "I now pronounce you husband and wife," the vicar said when the rings were exchanged. "You may kiss the bride." Their kiss was sweet and real, witnessed by people who truly cared for them, not by curious strangers. When they turned to face their small group of friends, everyone was smiling. Mrs. Edwards wiped tears from her eyes, and even Lady Helena looked suspiciously misty. They ate a simple meal at a long table set up in the garden. The food wasn't fancy: roast chicken, fresh bread, spring vegetables from the market, and a small cake made by Mrs. Parker. but everything tasted better than the finest meal Emmeline had ever eaten at her mother's table, because here she was free to laugh, to speak her mind, to be herself. As the evening grew late, Lady Helena raised her glass. "To Nicholas and Emmeline," she said, "may your journey together be long and filled with joy, learning and love." Everyone drank to that, and then it was time for goodbyes. They would leave for Vienna in the morning, taking only what they needed for the journey. Their belongings would follow later. That night, in the small hotel where they would stay before their journey, Emmeline stood at the window looking out at the London streets. So much had changed in just 1 year. She had lost the future she thought was certain, but found a far better one she could never have imagined. "What are you thinking?" Nicholas asked, coming to stand beside her. "About how different my life is from what I planned," she said, "and how glad I am for that difference." "Are you afraid?" he asked. "Of Vienna? Of all the new things to come?" "A little," she admitted. "But it's a good kind of fear. The kind that comes with adventure, not the kind that comes from trying to be perfect all the time." He took her hand, the gold ring still new and strange on his finger. "We'll face it together," he promised. 6 months later, Emmeline stood on the balcony of their apartment in Vienna, watching snow fall softly on the city. The rooftops and church spires were covered in white, and lamplighters were moving from street to street, bringing golden light to the early winter evening. The letter in her hand was from the Royal Botanical Society in London. They had accepted her drawings of Austrian alpine plants for their next publication. Her name, Emmeline Thornfield, would appear alongside those of respected botanists and naturalists. Her work valued not because she was a lady of good family, but because it was good work. Behind her, the apartment was warm and bright. Books filled the shelves, not just pretty ones meant for show, but books they read and discussed. Maps hung on the walls, marking places they had been and places they planned to go. Her drawing table stood by the window, covered with sketches of plants and scenes from their travels. On another table lay invitations to concerts, lectures, dinners with interesting people they had met here, musicians, scientists, writers, people from many countries with different ideas and ways of living. Vienna was a city of music and art, of old traditions and new ideas, and Emmeline was drinking it all in like a person who had been thirsty all her life without knowing it. The door opened, and Nicholas came in, bringing cold air and snowflakes with him. His cheeks were red from the cold, his eyes bright. "Sorry I'm late," he said, hanging up his coat. "The meeting at the embassy went longer than I expected." "It doesn't matter," Emmeline said, showing him the letter. "Look, they've accepted my drawings, all 12 of them." "Of course they did," Nicholas said, his face showing pride that made her heart swell. "They're excellent work. You have a gift, Emmeline. I've been telling you that for months." Later they walked along the Danube River, the water dark and slow under its coating of ice. Gas lamps lit their way, making the falling snow sparkle like tiny stars. Music drifted from a nearby concert hall, a waltz that made Emmeline want to dance right there in the street. "I had a letter from Lady Helena today too," she told Nicholas as they walked. "She says London society is still talking about our scandalous wedding and departure. Apparently my mother is telling everyone I've ruined myself completely." Nicholas smiled. "And have you? Ruined yourself?" Emmeline laughed, the sound bright in the snowy quiet. "If this is ruin, then everyone should be so fortunate." She thought about her life now, how she spent her days drawing and learning, exploring the city with Nicholas, meeting people who talked about ideas instead of gossip. How she slept soundly at night, no longer afraid of saying the wrong thing or disappointing someone. How she woke each morning eager to see what the day would bring. "What I once thought my greatest humiliation became my salvation," she said softly. "Had James not shown his true heart that day, I might never have found mine. I might have spent my whole life as a pretty doll in a big house, never knowing what it feels like to be truly alive." Nicholas squeezed her hand. "And I might never have found the one person who sees the world with the same curious eyes as my own." They stopped on a bridge overlooking the city. Lights twinkled in windows, smoke curled from chimneys, and in the distance a church bell rang the hour. Emmeline thought of all the people in those houses, each with their own stories, their own joys and sorrows. Once her world had been so small, now it grew larger every day. "To think," she said, "that all my life I was taught to fear the unexpected, to dread change, to stay safe within the rules. when it was precisely the unexpected that led me to true happiness. They stood together on the bridge as snow fell around them, turning the world clean and new. Ahead lay a future neither of them could predict, travels to new places, challenges they would face together, a life built on love and respect and shared wonder at the world's beauty. And behind lay the girl Emmeline had once been, the perfect, proper lady who had walked away from humiliation with her head high, not knowing that what seemed like an ending was really the first step on a much better path.